to be loved by God, then we will hear those words that will tell us that all our preparation has been worth it. Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Enter now into the joy of the Lord.
You've been listening to Father John Oliver and the Hearts and Minds podcast. Father John is the priest at St. Elizabeth Orthodox Church in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. This is a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.
The ancient faith for the modern world. This is Ancient Faith Radio.
Welcome to Live with the Louhs with your hosts, Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne Louh, where we will connect our Orthodox faith to day-to-day living and relationships to our family, our work, and our view of ourselves. Father Nicholas is the priest at St. John the Divine Greek Orthodox Church in Jacksonville, and Dr. Roxanne is a licensed clinical psychologist who uses her extensive training in private practice. Questions are welcome by calling 855-237-2346. That's 855-237-2346. Here now is Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Live with the Louhs. We are so excited that you're joining us just a few days away from Christmas.
Gosh, it's hard to believe, isn't it?
It is, and on behalf of our family, to yours, Merry Christmas. We hope that you have a blessed Nativity day as well as season. But my name is Father Nicholas Louh, and I'm joined by my lovely wife and co-host, Dr. Roxanne Louh, who's a clinical psychologist. And as we mentioned earlier, so honored that you're all joining us tonight. I know your lives are a little bit busy, probably trying to finalize everything for Christmas, but I'm happy that you've taken the time tonight to kind of recenter yourself, to kind of get focused back on the true reason of the season. We have a birthday to celebrate. It's the birthday of our Savior. And if you're just joining us for the very first time, Live with the Louhs is a show that merges both faith and psychology to guide you in your walk of faith, to give you some practical steps that you can apply right now in your own walk of faith. Before we dive into tonight's topic, I do want to encourage all of you to stay connected to us by joining our social media pages. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, and we're all under the headings of The Louhs. And our last name is spelled quite uniquely. It's spelled Louhs. That's The Louhs. So it's all of those different platforms. You can find us simply by putting in the search engine, The Louhs. And you can also, in fact, our show right now is being broadcast on our Facebook platform of the Louhs, as well as on Ancient Faith's platform as well, all on Facebook. And we hope that as you're tuning in, that you also, if you want to ask questions or comments, please feel free to do so on those platforms as well. And we also want to invite you to also check out our website at thelouhs.com. That's Louhs.com. Here you'll find out like the next speaking engagements that we're going to be speaking in. We have a lot of engagements actually coming up in the new year, and so you can find out if you live anywhere near those locations to come and join us, and also to receive our daily inspirational messages. Every day, Roxanne and I kind of write these daily inspirational messages that we hope encourage you. Hundreds and hundreds of people have joined. We just started this less than a year ago, and so many people have already joined our family in receiving these daily inspirational messages. And we will tell you that if you are receiving them on social media, and that's how you get them, beginning next week, we're going to make a little bit of a change and just simply have them accessible only through our by being part of our social by putting your email address in and receiving it through your inbox. So it would only be through our constant contact list. So we do encourage you, if you want a little word of encouragement, go to thelouhs.com, click on that subscribe button, and just simply put in your email address. You can always unsubscribe over time if you'd like to, but we hope that you will stay connected. And finally, as you all know, there's only a few days left before Christmas. And we encourage you, if you're looking for a great gift to give to a family member or a friend, consider our book, Renewing You, A Priest, a Psychologist, and a Plan. This book is already in its second printing, by the way, but what's really exciting about it is that we feel like God has blessed us so much, and we're using all the revenues that we receive from this book to going and making a difference, in this world. And so there are things that are going on that we give towards our church. but also outreach ministries within our church community, but also outreach programs that are outside of our church, like the American Cancer Society. We do this because really the impetus behind us writing our book was because of our dad's diagnosis with cancer, and both of them passed away within 8 months of each other. And so this is just a way of us to give back, but also to make a difference. You can find the Audible version of our book, Renewing You, by going to audible.com and just simply put in there, Renewing You, in the search engine. And you can find our book at right here on Ancient Faith by going to store.ancientfaith.com. And finally, before we go into our message for today, we do invite all of you that we're doing a Making Over Your Marriage retreat. This is a retreat that is hosted by Ancient Faith, and you can, if you're looking to kind of enhance your marriage, to kind of just give it, to help it grow from where it was to what it needs to be, we do encourage you to check this out. You can find out more about this retreat. It's on February 18th through the 20th. It's an in-person retreat at the Antiochian Village, February 18th through the 20th. It's called Making Over Your Marriage. Roxanne and I are going to be there the whole weekend, just doing some amazing work with all of you. And so I know it's almost booked, to be quite honest with you. I think there's only a few rooms.
Only a few rooms left.
Yeah, a few rooms left. So, but the retreat, again, is called Making Over Your Marriage. So let's get started with tonight's topic. You know, I love Christmas. I love decorating the Christmas tree. I love the food. I love being with the family, and I love giving gifts to my family. And, you know, one of the traditions that we have in the Lowe family is I love to be the first person down those stairs in our home. And the first thing I do is go and put on some Christmas carols. I just love Christmas music. And I love to have this music as the kids kind of run down the steps and look under the Christmas tree. And I love Christmas carols because of the messages that's in the music. That in every one of these Christmas carols that we hear during Christmas time, there's these little messages of encouragement. Take, for example, Joy to the World. I love Joy to the World. Let's just listen to the lyrics for just a second. It says, "Joy to the world, the Lord is come. Let earth receive her King." I think one of the great messages in this particular Christmas carol is that joy is not about waiting for something to happen to you. It's receiving the God who came for you. I just love that. Joy has come into the world. Or how about Away in a Manger by Charles Gabriel? Away in a manger, no crib for his head. The little Lord Jesus laid down his sweet head. And I love this message in this music that God doesn't wait for us to prepare the manger of our heart for him, that he is a God that we worship, that doesn't wait for us to do enough good for him to come down to earth, but rather meets us where we are at, that he loves us so much that even in the midst of us really living in a messy manger of our soul, he comes to save us. And who could forget Silent Night, O holy night, all is calm and all is bright, sleep in heavenly peace. And I love that, because peace is not removing all of the crises that we face in our life, but putting Christ at the center of our life. But there's one Christmas carol, it's actually a recent Christmas carol that I really love, and it goes a little bit like this. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. Let there be peace on earth, the peace that was meant to be. It was written by Julie Jackson Miller. And I want to really hone in, friends, tonight on this word, peace. In the Bible, there's over 950 references that all describe who Christ is. You know the ones like, he is the newborn king, or he is our Redeemer, our Savior, a wonderful counselor, or my personal favorite that we find in the book of Isaiah, the Prince of Peace. You see, when Christ came to us 2,000 years ago, he came to bring peace among all of his people. That's why we hear this extraordinary statement that's said by the archangel when he says, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace and goodwill to all people." I love that. You see, he came and gave us peace, but check this out. He gave us peace so that we can go out and give peace. In the Bible, it actually says that we are sons and daughters, or sons and daughters of light, that we too are called to be the sons and daughters of that Prince of Peace. Well, how do you know that you're a son or a daughter if you're not carrying on the legacy of the Father? But if we're truly honest with ourselves, friends, we can look at a world that is struggling to carry on what I like to call the family name of peace. On a global scale right now, did you know that every year 4 wars are declared? That's every year. In fact, in the history of recorded history, of secular history that is, that amounts to about 3,500 years of recorded secular history. There's only 286 years that have had on this earth where there has been peace on this world, in this world. Isn't that extraordinary that in the 3,600 years or 3,500 years of secular recorded history, only 286 of those years have been out there with a world where there's no peace.
I think that just illustrates how actually difficult this is to put into motion.
Right.
That everything divides us from peace. Everything in this world, in our flesh, can threaten to divide us from instilling, maintaining, and encouraging that peace. It is not an easy thing to do.
Right, exactly. And that's just on a global scale. And I think, one of the things that we love to do on our show is like to share with you facts, because I think, it's one thing to say that we're in a world that there's so much division and holding up grudges and just infighting. But then when you start reading the actual history and the statistics of that every year 4 wars are declared, and listen to this so tragically, friends, is that 3.6 billion people have died because of war. Now, that's not even including the effects of after war, the aftermath, the war after the war in many ways. The other day I was speaking, not only is it that 3.6 billion people have lost their lives, but we even see in our own families that there's a lack of peace. So often during the holidays, people struggle to be around other people that create tension. There's a level of sometimes a level of unease that takes place. And we mentioned this in our last show about being merciful, but I was just talking to someone just the other day who was sharing with me that her mother-in-law is coming into town during Christmas, and Christmas for her is not a time of peace. It's not a Christmas, it's a Christmas for her, because she's so worried about her mother-in-law and how she controls everything and where to put the food on the table and how it needs to be labeled. And it just creates so much levels of just an unhealthiness that they have. Not to mention that for a lot of people, you're experiencing a time where people have a great deal of, it's a reminder of all of the things that are not going well in their life during the holidays, whereas a lot of you're around family members who may have caused division or may have caused things that have frustrated you. And so we want to share with you tonight that if we're going to talk about peace, then just like that Christmas carol, it needs to begin with us. You're listening to Live with the Louhs right here on Ancient Faith, and we love having you on our show, but we would love to have you even more participate in our show. And so we encourage you. The question that we're going to ask for today is what are some obstacles to you letting peace begin in your life? What are some ways that are some obstacles that can create a level of unease in your life or tension that can cause you to not want to share peace in this world? And you can call us with your responses by calling us at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. You can also email us a question during our show at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com. So right before the show, Roxanne and I were just sitting around and we were kind of just thinking about what are some true obstacles to peace? What are the ways that, why do we struggle so much with being and sharing peace? So here's number one. I think we struggle with peace because for many of us, we've been hurt. I think we just need to at times just own the fact that yes, someone hurt us, someone offended us. I heard someone put it this way: peace is the glorious moment when everybody stops fighting for a moment, only to reload to go back to fighting again. And I think so often in our own world that peace that we have, if we do have it, it's just a very brief moment, because there's so many opportunities, Roxanne, for us to be angry, to be frustrated with people that frustrate us and to get and who get under our skin. And so often when people do that to us, when we do get hurt, levels of bitterness and resentment, we kind of, instead of reloading on mercy, we can actually reload on anger.
Well, right. And so that feeling of anger is really the greatest obstacle, because everybody thinks of peace when they are at peace.
Right.
We do not organically think of peace when we are angry. And so this is one of the most divisive, probably most important feelings for us to learn as human beings, to contend with in our flesh. It's a very natural emotion. It's a very real emotion. Jesus himself felt anger. The disciples felt anger. This is a very real part of who we are. But we have to realize that we're not going to get to the place of feeling like bringing peace from an internal standpoint
Right.
when our feelings shift.
Right.
And how many times throughout the day are our feelings shifting? Whether it's from anger, whether it's from stress, whether it's from an old wound that just popped up, whether it's from offense, whether it's from hurt, none of those feelings organically make us want to seek peace.
Mm-hmm.
So it has to come from something greater. It has to come from something deeper.
Mm-hmm.
It does not come from the flesh.
And I think that brings us to our second point. So if number one is that we just have to own that sometimes we do get hurt. But number two is that we also, I think, follow the wrong story. And like to what Roxanne was just sharing with us, I think we have to realize that we're always kind of listening to ourselves. We're listening to these voices. And sometimes what happens is that when someone does hurt us or offend us, we create a story in our mind about what their intent was, what their purpose is, and then we do what we talk about in psychology. We kind of catastrophize things. We kind of keep piling on more and more of what they're doing so that we start looking for anything to justify that narrative, that story that we've created in our mind about why we should not offer peace to these people.
I mean, in a sense, we vilify
Right.
a person from an act.
Right.
And once we've vilified them in our mind, we are then righteous for not seeking peace. Think about it. If you truly believe that this is a villain, whether it's the person who cut you off in traffic or your mother-in-law who's too controlling or your husband who said something the wrong way, if you truly believe or your colleague is a villain, is not on your team, are you going to seek peace with them?
Mm-hmm. Especially when you're creating a narrative all around that, because our thoughts shape, as we talk about a lot, our thoughts shape our behaviors. So if we're creating this story and we're adding chapters and chapters and chapters
Right.
to that story, it's so extreme. It's so difficult for us to have the clarity to say, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be a bearer of peace. I mean, blessed are the
Absolutely.
peacemakers. And so I need to be looking for those opportunities. But when that story that I'm creating keeps growing and I keep adding different parts and chapters to it, it's so difficult to do that. And so that's why it's so important that we're always studying what kind of story or narrative that we're creating.
And bringing it back to facts.
Right.
I think that's very important. Sticking to just this moment and what we need for just this moment to recover from just that moment.
Exactly.
It's not every other moment. It's not every other facet of their character. It's just that moment.
Right. And I think too, Roxanne, as we were talking about this on the last show last week, I think too is just, being very careful that we don't just trust our feelings. I think this is so important because our feelings oftentimes can lead us astray.
Right,
and I think so often because our feelings seem so real to us, and we're not please understand, we're not telling you that don't trust your feelings, but we are saying that be careful about your feelings because sometimes they can be so clear in our thoughts that they can also feed that narrative that we're talking about.
Yeah, it's a self-replenishing cycle.
Right.
Interestingly. And for those of you who have taken the Myers-Briggs, this is sort of an interesting side note. There are those who are either a little bit more intuitive or a little bit more sensing, right? So this is your letter N versus letter S. Those that are more intuitive are much more likely to draw conclusions without sufficient evidence, okay? So they see patterns in life and they're very creative and they can sort of arrive at big vision. But in relationship or in offense, they can also assign motive that isn't there. They can put together lots of different things and say, oh, this happened for this reason. So intuitors have to be really, really careful here. Those who are the letter S are sort of much more fact driven. So they're a little bit more likely to pay attention to the facts in a situation and less likely to sort of assign motive. And so just knowing that about ourselves too sort of helps us know, hey, am I more at risk here when I'm angry to start assigning intention and motive in somebody else and putting things together that define this narrative, sort of creating a backstory that may not be there, may or may not be there.
Yeah. Just because it's a feeling doesn't mean it's a fact.
Right.
Here's number 3. We're also, one of the reasons why I think that we struggle with sharing and giving peace is because we're waiting for the other person.
Right.
I think we so often are just waiting for that person to simply make the first step. And then once they take that first step, then you would extend the olive branch of peace. The problem with that is that we're putting your level of peace in someone else's hand. We're letting that person who offended you in your eyes to control whether or not you have a level of peace in your life. See, we oftentimes think that we kind of operate again with this spiritual battle that we buy into, that if this happens, then I'll do that. So if this person takes the first step, then I'll feel better, and then I'll continue that level of peace and extend that level of peace towards them. But the reality is, the truth is that our peace can never be contingent upon someone else. That we'll never have peace if we're waiting for someone else to act first. And we're going to talk about that in the second half of the show. But
well, and two, I mean, I've heard so many people say to me, well, they don't deserve that peace.
Right.
But is our decision to grant peace or give peace or maintain peace or invoke peace a result of whether it is deserved, or is it an instruction about who we are called to be? Irrelevant. I mean, of whether people deserve it. I mean, did we deserve the peace that Christ came into the world to give us?
In that manger.
In that manger. He came when we were actually undeserving. Undeserving.
Exactly. So number three, we're waiting for the other person to act. And oftentimes when we're waiting, we're kind of, again, going back to our feelings, we're kind of waiting for that feeling to kind of catch up. And then once that feeling catches up to us, then we'll act. But again, we just warn you that your peace is not something that you give to someone. It's something that you yourself choose to do, and that it's you making that first choice. And finally, the fourth thing, and again, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your thoughts on just areas or areas that can kind of keep us from sharing peace, and maybe just some obstacles to you giving peace to people. So please call us at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. If you don't feel comfortable sharing your name, you don't have to. You could totally be anonymous, but just we want to be an opportunity. We want to be a resource for you to kind of help you grow in your walk of faith. And so we'd love to hear from you as well. So number 4, I would say, is we're not ready. We're just not there. Like sometimes we don't want to give peace because we're still waiting for for our soul in some ways to kind of catch up. And again, if we're not careful, again, we're allowing something external to make our choice. You know, the word happiness is such you hear that all the time, that people say, I just simply want to be happy. But that word happiness, and we've shared this on our show before, is hap is the root of that word really is the word circle, or based upon circumstance. So the happiness that we have, what we're saying when we say we want happiness as opposed to joy, happiness is based upon circumstance. Joy is based upon choice. It is a choice that we make. There's a choice that that no matter what is around us or what is happening to us, it's not going to steal the peace that God gives in us. And so often when we're talking about we're not ready, is because we're waiting for something external, a circumstance to change externally, and then I'll make the change internally. And what we're saying is, don't buy into that lie. It's actually a choice that you're going to make right now, today, that I'm going to choose peace, and I'm going to let it begin with me.
I mean, it's interesting too, because when we make that choice, even though we feel, that, gosh, well, that's not going to teach someone the lesson, or they're going to get away with it. I mean, this is probably one of the greatest obstacles, is you're letting people get off the hook.
Right.
You're letting people get away with how they treat you, and they're going to keep doing that. I had someone say to me the other day, I'm tired of always doing the right thing. I'm tired of always being the one to choose well. And the other person sort of gets away scot-free with snapping at me, making remarks they shouldn't, hurting my feelings, doing things to undermine me. But the reality is, when we really think about that, when we respond with a response that I almost feel like neutralizes the negative, not even necessarily bring it to positive, but just neutralize the negative, adding that sort of base to the acid, something very interesting happens on the inside of someone else. The retaliatory, defensive kind of anger response sort of calms, and they move into a completely different area of their brain where they actually experience humility. And interestingly enough, their sort of fight or flight kind of calms down because you're no longer a threat, and suddenly they have this moment of self-reflection where they feel guilt, they feel uncomfortable, maybe they did something wrong. They may not put words on it in that moment, but there is a self-reflection that occurs that would never have happened had you not attempted to respond to that negativity or respond to that offense with something neutral. That is the only way to sort of breed self-awareness in the other person. If you respond with the attack, fight or flight is still going on, and it's a back and forth, and no one's self-reflecting, right? So the greatest way to get someone to see they're wrong is to come in with the neutral,
Right.
not to stay focused on that wrong.
Because we've trained ourselves to have such a retaliatory act where if someone does something, my response is I have to give them to do something back to them. And it may not always be the same. In other words, for some people, it may be simply giving the silent treatment. For some others, it may be, screaming and yelling. For some others, it may just be doing some very passive aggressive behavior. But whatever it is, we're retaliating. And I think what you're saying so beautifully, Roxanne, is the fact that when we actually get out of our own way and just simply allowing our God to simply just work through us and for us to be the person that kind of speaks in a very soft voice and just does not give what that person is wanting, that will fuel that flame.
Absolutely. It's as if his spirit within us leads his spirit within them. It is a beautiful, and I've watched it take place in session. You see the spirit lead someone, and before you know it, the spirit has shifted the heart of someone else.
When we do marriage counseling in the church, oftentimes what I'll do is when we get a couple together, right before they get, you get them into the office, and oftentimes they just start, if they're together, they oftentimes will just begin saying about what the other person has done wrong. And if I tend to kind of just operate this way, where I'll just say, okay, you stop talking, both of you stop talking, and I just want you, sir, to pray for your wife. And in that moment, it's like the least thing that they're expecting, because they want to just simply pounce on the other person. They want to just simply give, yell, scream, hey, Father. They almost want sometimes the priest to be the alliance to say, look what she's doing to me, or look what he's doing to me. And in that moment, where you're like, let's just bring back the Prince of Peace in this situation. Let's just let that peace begin.
What a beautiful interruption that is. That must be.
Exactly. And it's the faces of them, Roxanne, are oftentimes like one of bewilderment, because it's like the first 20 seconds is like, what are we doing? But what we find is that it allows a level of calm in that situation. And then oftentimes I follow that prayer up with saying, what do you love the most about your wife? What do you love the most about your husband?
To draw that up in a moment of retaliation is incredible. And what would happen if we all kind of internalize that in the moment where we're about to react, to, even if you can't do it aloud, pray silently for them in your mind, in your heart. It's amazing. But I'm always reminded that God can change the things that we cannot. He can shift hearts. Even when our words are failing.
And to build on this before our break, because we're coming up to a break right now, but I think one of the things that I love so much about the Orthodox wedding service is that, we wear these crowns as a sign of the king and the queen of our homes, but also this beautiful visual to not only the couple, but to the people that are a part of that bridal party, the celebration, the families, of seeing this couple of wearing these crowns of martyrdom, that in many ways I'm dying to what I need, my own ego, my own resentment, my own bitterness. I'm dying to that. For what? For the betterment of the family. Because we realize that we're in a spiritual battle, friends. A lot of what we're seeing in the world right now, the division that we see, the wars that are being waged, not only on a global level, but even within our families, this all has its roots in spiritual warfare that the devil yearns to divide and conquer, to divide us as opposed to unite us. And we see that in many ways, if you look around the world, that battle that he's waging, many people take that bait. They take that and allow their emotions to lead them. And so we have to kind of go back to that notion that we follow the Prince of Peace, and we have to follow that. Remember that there's a level of dying to our own ego for the betterment of the family. You're listening to Live with the Louhs, and we're, again, so happy that you're joining us this evening. We're talking about let there be peace, and let it begin with me. And we encourage you to call us at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. We've been sharing with you what are the obstacles to why we can't get peace, why we struggle in just simply giving peace. And we talked about it, that sometimes we've just been hurt too much. We've just been hurt so much that we can't, or that we're following the wrong story, that we're following the wrong narrative that's telling us that they don't deserve peace, or we're waiting for that other person to act first, that they should be the ones to be seeking the peace, or that we're just simply not ready. We're going to take a quick break. On the other side of this break, we're going to share with you 4 ways, so don't miss this, 4 ways that you can let peace begin with us. So stay right with us right here on Ancient Faith Radio.
Live with the Lows with Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne will be back in a moment. Give them a call at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. They would love to hear from you.
Are you struggling in your walk with Christ? Do you want to rediscover your reason for living, the person you were created to be? Renewing You, a priest, a psychologist, and a plan gives you the keys to unlock areas of your life that hold you back from fully experiencing the renewal and transformation God has in mind for you. Co-authored by a priest and a psychologist, Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne Louh, Renewing You combines principles of spiritual growth with psychological tools to help you become your best self, fully connected with God's purpose for you. To purchase this book, please go to store.ancientfaith.com. That's store.ancientfaith.com.
We're back with Live with the Lows and Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne. Do you have a question for the Lows? Call in now at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. Here once again is Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne.
Well, welcome back, everyone, to Live with the Lows. So glad that you're joining us this evening, just a few days away from Christmas. And we just love that you've taken the time to just take a break from the busyness of this season to just spend it with us. And we're talking tonight about letting there be peace and let it begin with me. Let it begin with us and how we live out our lives. We do want to just once again remind you that next week our daily inspirational messages will only be available via our through email. And so if you have not subscribed to receiving our daily inspirational messages right now during our show, I'd encourage you go to thelows.com. That's LOUHS, thelows.com. Click on that subscribe button and then put your email address in. And then every single day, you're going to receive a daily word of encouragement that we hope will inspire you. And if you have some friends that you think may enjoy that inspiration as well, tell them to also go online to our website and subscribe as well. So we have a caller in. And so caller, welcome to Live with the Lows.
Hello, Father.
Yes. Welcome.
Welcome.
I just want to thank you, too, for everything that you do. My question, peace for me and trouble with my daughter, trying to make the peace with her, but her not wanting that, and pretty much hating me to where I can't find that peace.
So sorry.
Sorry to hear that. Struggles in relationships like that are a chronic hurt that's sort of always there. They're deep and they're painful. But that's a question that I am sure is on the hearts of many during this time.
Mm-hmm.
When there's somebody that we're, feeling disconnected with. All I can say is don't let her refusal or her anger change your narrative or your decisions. That you, with everything you have, continue to chase that relationship. I think one of the hardest things to do is to continue a pursuit in light of someone not accepting that pursuit. And we kind of give up. And then interestingly, I find that their narrative changes to you stopped trying. And so I almost never want to give someone the permission to define me in that way. And that is the one thing we have control over is who we are and who we continue to be despite what they are giving you back. I'm sure there's time to listen and to validate and to sort of go backwards and figure out what is the hurt, what is the pain. And yes, there's a good priest, a good therapist can sit down and sort of walk you guys through that, because sometimes when there's a lot of pain, it's very hard to do that on your own because the pain sort of defines the circumstance and makes it hard to talk about. But there's time for that, but never, ever stop sending those, I would say, inspiration, encouragement, messages of love, messages of desire. And that way the narrative can never change. And you hope that through prayer, that God can change your heart. I'm always reminded he truly can change the things that we can't.
Does that help, caller?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, and God bless you, and Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So we, again, just like the caller did, if you're going through a difficult time right now, maybe you have an area of your life in which, with a family member or a friend, that there's not peace, and you'd like some guidance. Don't be. You can totally be anonymous, just like our caller was. You can call us at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. Roxanne, one of the beautiful stories that I love speaking about when we're talking about peace is really begins with a tragedy. It's the assassination in June of 1914 of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife when they were assassinated. And there ended up being a war that was between Austria and Serbia, and then eventually Russia got involved and Germany got involved. And long story short, Belgium and Britain and eventually America. This war that I'm talking about was World War I. And a lot of these people declared war within a 1 week span. Almost anywhere between 16 and 20 million. They're not even sure, Roxanne, about this, of how many people lost their lives, but 16 to 20 million people lost their lives. And much of the deaths was due to a tactic called trench warfare. We've talked about this a little bit on the show in the past, and I love just kind of reminding us. Basically, in trench warfare, is basically you establish your position and you dig yourself in on that position, and then you hide yourself in that position. You never really come out eye to eye with your enemy. You just simply establish your line and what you believe, and then you just kind of hurl a whole bunch of ammo and different weapons at the other side without ever looking at the other person. This tactic alone is the reason why so many people lost their lives in World War I. It's this trench warfare that was developed and the hurling of weapons without ever coming eye to eye with that person. And I think to myself, how often we do that. How often we too just simply hurl weapons. The weapons of our words, the weapons of our actions, the weapons in how we treat people who just simply have hurt us. And maybe, just maybe in this 2021, that maybe we all need to declare a Christmas truce. And what is a truce? A truce means to stop the fighting. You see, when we look at 2021, there is a lot of fighting that's taking place. We see our nation divided. We see stresses in our marriages. We see friction between families. And so often we too can just simply dig in. And I believe that the devil at these moments loves to see all this tension, all this division. In fact, I would argue that he sows those seeds in us. And if we're not careful, we can allow ourselves to dig in, to stay where we are, to continue to lob bombs at our family members who we disagree with or people that we think differently politically. And nobody wants to change their position. Nobody wants to do anything about it. But the reality is, friends, is that we need to remember that peace is possible. But check this out. Peace is not the absence of trouble. It is the presence of God. It is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of Christ. And so what I want to share with you are 4 different ways that you and I can be people of peace. So if you have a little piece of paper out and a pen, maybe you might want to write these down, especially as we're approaching Christmas just a few days away. Number 1 is you'll never find Christmas peace until you take the first step. I love this because so often, as we were talking about earlier, we tend to want to wait for the other person to move. But the reality is that true Christianity and true living out our walk of faith begins with us. And when we stand before Christ, we won't be able to use an example or an excuse of, well, I couldn't because they hadn't moved first. Like God anticipates and expects us to be the first. When St. Peter asked Christ, how many times should I forgive someone? He says 70 times 7. And then in another part of the Gospel of Matthew, he says 70 times 7 daily.
Wow.
If you were to simply calculate 70 times 7, which is 490, divided by the number of minutes that are in the day. If you never slept during the day, in other words, you were up for 24 hours, you would be forgiving someone every 3 minutes. You see, God forgave us first, and he expects us to extend that forgiveness also, even if it means every 3 minutes. It requires us to take that next step, to take the first step. Let me read you a Bible verse that I love to share. It's coming from the book of Ephesians, chapter 2, verses 14. Listen to what it says. For Christ himself has brought peace to us. He united the Jews and the Gentiles into one people when in his own body on the cross, he broke down the walls that separated us. I love that. It talks about that. He brought it. He didn't wait. He brought it with him. He brought that peace, and he expects us to do the same. He took the first step, and so should we. I love how the Gospel of Matthew gives what we call the Beatitudes. There's 9 Beatitudes, and if you're looking for a sermon series on the Beatitudes, we're going to begin a sermon series at our parish in Jacksonville on the Beatitudes beginning in January. But listen to what one of the Beatitudes says. This is in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, verses 9. It says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons and daughters of God." You see, again, going back to what we talked about in the very beginning of the show, our legacy, the legacy that we have as being Christians, of carrying on our Heavenly Father's name and being called sons and daughters of God, is when we're peacemakers, when we're going out and bringing peace to people. And I love that because it says blessed. And if you're not familiar with the word blessed, comes from the Greek word makari, or makarios, which translated means a tremendous joy that you will have. In other words, that when you do this, contrary to what the world tells you, or even what your feelings may tell you, there'll be a level of joy when you are extending that peace that only God can give you on the inside, that you'll experience because you took that first step.
I mean, that is, I think, that notion of when we die to ourselves and allow ourselves to be led by the Spirit, we feel the peace of the Spirit. So, in some ways, even if you can't get yourself to feeling like it's deserved by someone, you yourself deserve to have that kind of peace of being led by the Spirit. And so, when you think about that, peacemaker, it is not just peacekeeper. Don't just keep it where it is. It is to create it. It is to be that person who is willing to step out. And think about it, every 3 minutes. So even if you haven't started off well in a moment of offense, after 3 minutes, shift, right? After another 3 minutes, there's another opportunity, shift again. We can always, it's never too late. I always tell people, take the next best step. Take the next best step. And even if you're listening to the show and you think, well, gosh, I haven't been doing this, and take the next best step. It's not about looking back. It's about constantly renewing ourselves and replenishing ourselves by looking forward at reminding us of what we are called to do. This is not an opportunity for judgment because this is hard, and we don't always have sort of these tools. Most of the time, people don't neglect peace because they're misintended. It's because they don't know how. They don't know what to do with these really intense, overwhelming feelings that are deep down on the inside of them, making them feel alone or betrayed or hurt and alone. And so these are just some of the tools, right? This is scratching the surface. And if you want to know more about this, we talk about this a lot in the book. Especially in the relationship chapter, even in the trials chapter, in the forgiveness chapter, that we actually go through this in a lot of different places, even in Vices. And so, because this is a big tool, okay? So being a peacemaker, just take that next best step to create that peace and think of it as always coming back to neutralizing the negative. You don't have to go positive. You don't have to go 180 degrees. You just have to bring it up to neutral.
Exactly. I love, and if you're writing these things down, I want you to write down this Bible verse, Galatians chapter 5, verse 22 to 23. And those of you that know this verse, it should be definitely a refrigerator verse. You should have this somewhere where you see this all the time. But it's where St. Paul talks about the fruits of the Spirit. One of our church fathers, he says that you will always know the roots by its fruit. You will know how strong the roots are by the fruit that it produces. So in this particular reading from the book of Galatians, it talks about the fruits of our tree, the fruits of our faith. In other words, what we should be producing if our roots are in Christ. It says this: the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy. This is what it should look like, and peace. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. I love that. It's almost giving us in many ways a roadmap of what it looks like to have our life rooted in Christ and taking that first step. So the number one,
good way to kind of test the waters too, to
Right.
know if you are truly being led by the Spirit, you'll have peace.
mm-hmm,
So to me, that's such a test, right?
Right.
If I'm not having peace and I've been simmering on something for 3 to 4 days, maybe I'm trying to manage this all by myself in my flesh, and I am not allowing the Spirit to lead my mind, my heart, and more importantly, my soul.
I love that. So again, number one, you'll never find Christmas peace until you take the first step. We again welcome you to call us at 1-855-237-2346, 1-855-237-2346. Just have some questions about how do you be a bearer of peace in this world, carry on our Heavenly Father's name in the way in which we live out our lives. Join the conversation. We'd love to hear from you. You can also email us on our email us at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com. Here's number 2. You'll find Christmas peace when you give people the benefit of the doubt. I think this is probably one area, Roxanne, where I think people struggle with so much. Because again, as we were mentioning at the top of the show, it's so easy when we do get angry to create a story that we follow, a narrative of this is what they did, this is why they did it. And then we start adding chapters to this story. And then oftentimes we'll go and tell 10 other people who will oftentimes kind of go along with reinforce it. And we keep, and so this story grows so much into what, to creating a story that most of the time is just simply not true. Not everyone who's offended you, friends, meant to do so. Not everything that you believe is always right.
And also, people make mistakes.
Right.
I mean, so honestly, like, I have to tell myself, so what if they said something offensive in that moment?
Mm-hmm.
They don't always do so. And sometimes even if they always do so, were they ever given the tools? How were they spoken to growing up?
Right.
Do they have the tools to navigate their own intensity in that moment? It is this sort of underlying ability to sort of look outside that moment at somebody else's story, and also to consider me, myself. Have I ever made a mistake? Have I ever offended someone? I think it's so easy to judge in that moment if we forget that we ourselves are flawed in much the same way. And hasn't someone given us the benefit of the doubt when we've made our own mistakes, right? So this is something to consider in somebody else's mistake. I've made mistakes. I can almost relate to it. And it almost brings us back to a shared experience where now you're not my enemy. I have a shared experience with you, and that I can identify myself, my own struggles, when I've fallen prey to the exact same thing that person said in the heat of a moment that they didn't mean and probably wouldn't say tomorrow morning when they feel well rested, right?
I love how the book of James says, mercy always triumphs over judgment. And how
I love the book of James for that reason.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just in such simplistic words
Very
shares with us,
practical.
but how heavy a statement it is that mercy will always triumph over judgment. And that when we have that level of mercy and giving people the benefit of the doubt, and I love what you were sharing, Roxanne, because I think so often we forget that God showed us mercy first. Like if there was, like as humans, when we look at how we are as a people, and how in the book of Romans it says that while we were still sinning, that God demonstrated his love to us by coming and saving us. And even in the divine liturgy, when we talk about that, while during a baptism, it says that Christ could not stand to see the human race being tormented by the devil. In other words, he saw the world being so tormented by our own sinfulness that he came into this world and he saved us. And so for that reason, I just want to encourage you, step into mercy. Give people the benefit of the doubt.
And these are intentional thought processes, by the way.
Right.
Again, feelings don't create those thoughts. You almost have to go against them.
Right.
You literally have to work against the grain to draw up merciful thoughts, because while you're praying to God to shift your heart, you can't also be drawing up through your will, which we have the free will to do so, all of the angering, non-merciful, non-benefit of the doubt sorts of thoughts, because it's a self-defeating cycle. God gave us free will, but he expects us to use that will in synergy with his goodness and what his Spirit is trying to do within us.
Right.
We certainly have the ability to negate all he's trying to do.
Right. And that's and what we're talking about is so many different things can happen to people within their day, whether it be a boss that speaks to them in a certain way, maybe something that they experience on the way to work that day, maybe on the way home, maybe a thought that's in their mind that they just can't let go. So many things. Give people some space. So number 2 is you find Christmas peace by giving people the benefit of the doubt. Here's number 3. You find Christmas peace by you seeking peace. I love this. We've got to, I think one of those things that when you look at our own world that we're looking in, is that we oftentimes allow things to simply happen to us, and we're waiting things to happen to us, and then based upon what happens to us, that becomes what we react to. But what would it look like if we sought first that peace? What if every single day we sought peace? Peace even within ourselves, peace with the people that we're in contact with, peace with even the people that actually have frustrated us. That word peacemaker that we talked about in the book of, in the Gospel of Matthew, one of those Beatitudes that we talked about. You know what it means? It's the definition of the word peacemaker it means it is a bringer of national tranquility. We talked about this several weeks ago. In other words, it is someone that is yearning to bring tranquility to the world, to the people, to the world that they're living in. And maybe our prayers need to be tonight, when we go to bed and tomorrow morning, is God, help me to be a peacemaker. Help me to seek peace. I had someone tell me, well, Father, what if, if they don't change, if they continue to do what they've been doing? What I tell people oftentimes is conflict cannot continue without your participation. Conflict cannot continue without your participation. So you simply take a step back and say, no, they may be wanting to seek arguments, they may want to seek conflict, but I'm not. I am going to be a peacemaker. I'm going to seek peace in everything that I do.
And to seek that peace, I think there's a piece of us that has to really let go of the control of what someone does do.
Right.
I mean, I think that's sort of half the reason people hold on to their righteousness, is the need to control the outcome of somebody else's life.
Mm-hmm.
But I am always reminded that when we seek our best selves, when we are that peacemaker, God has this amazing way of bringing about change in someone else in ways that we would least expect, and that we could have never brought by our own volition.
Right.
And so, again, this is why God is always reminding us, cast your burdens on me. Trust me, I've got this. In these moments, we are not leading the ship alone. And we do have to release that control over what someone decides to do, because in trying to shape it, change it, make it, we end up losing ourselves. And it is in that control where we become our worst selves, invoking the worst self in someone else.
Roxanne, we gave a sermon series, as you know, on the book of James several months back. And, I love the book of James, and we quoted earlier, but if you've never read the book of James, what oftentimes one of the themes that comes out of the book of James is where James kind of compares the wise versus the unwise Christian. And he says, in talking about the wise Christian, it says this, it says, but the wisdom that comes from heaven is always peace loving. I love that. In other words, it's always someone, the Christian wise one is someone that's always loving peace and yearning for that. And then it continues, it says, but human anger, this is now in the book of James chapter 1, it says, human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. In other words, that anger and unwise behavior, if unmanaged, will not be able to produce the righteousness, that peace that God desires. And so again, maybe tonight that prayer should be, God, if they won't change, then change me. If they're not willing to seek that peace, then let it start with me. Here's number 4, is that once we are seeking peace, the number 4 is to remember that you find Christmas peace by giving peace, by sharing his peace. I love this message that we found in the book of Philippians. It's actually a message I shared this past Sunday. It said, do nothing out of selfish ambition. In other words, don't do things based upon how you or what benefits you, but in humility, always value others above yourself. In other words, give them value, even those that may frustrate you. So I want to encourage you that in talking about this giving peace, let me just give you some little ways that you can do it today. You can give that peace by seeing people the way God saw us. You know, our thickness of our skin is only 1/16 of an inch. Only 1/16 of an inch. And this past Sunday, it's always the Sunday before Christmas, the priest will read in the Orthodox Church the genealogy of Christ. He shares all of these grandparents, these grandfathers of Christ, his lineage. And these people, some of which that are in that lineage, are people that the world itself would have devalued, would have not found value in. And then in that genealogy, Matthew, who was a tax collector, who the world itself at that time would have devalued, he shares the names of 4 women. They are Thamar, Rahab, Ruth, and Bathsheba. And obviously there's Mary in there as mentioned in that genealogy. But these 4 women that are specifically mentioned all have a tremendous story. And again, God, these people that the world itself would have devalued, why would Matthew put this in the genealogies? Why would he share all these names of these people and make them as part of the lineage of Christ? I think that one of the things that we talk about, actually our church talks about this a lot, is that the lineage of Christ is to show everyone that everyone has something to offer, that God sees value in everyone. He doesn't see the mess, he sees the masterpiece that they are. And so one of the encouragements that I would say to you is that when you give peace, is that you recognize that that person that you may have a conflict with, that may have hurt you, that the Spirit of Christ is in them. And that just like Christ comes to us in that manger, he also wants us to come to the people in the world that are coming across our path and to express and to show love. And that we shouldn't allow 1/16 of an inch while someone looks or how someone acts or what they do to keep us from showing the love that God wants us to share. And then also I would encourage you also as well that in addition to giving that peace by seeing people the way God saw us, but is also treating people the way God treated us. You know, I think to myself when Christ was born, he's the creator of the universe. Like everything that we see, from the blades of grass outside to every snowflake that's falling, that may be falling in where you live, or everything that we just experience, from the food, the matter, the planets. God created all that. And he could have chosen any day to come to this earth, but he came on a day in which there was no vacancy at a hotel. I mean, just imagine that he could have been at any hotel at any time, but he chose a place that was a no vacancy sign. And I was sharing with my community on Sunday that Christ chose to be born in a manger. And if you do any research on what mangers were during the time of Christ's birth, what their purpose was, what this cave was that we talk about at his nativity, is that those caves were places where sheep would be stored, live sheep would be stored for sometimes days, depending on the inclement weather that was going on at that time. And so Christ was born in a place that was not clean, like we see on these manger scenes that we see in front of people's homes during the Christmas time, but he was actually born in an absolute mess. And that maybe that God was telling us is that Christ did not wait for us to get everything right, that he came in the mess of the cave of our souls to save us. And so should we do the same with other people, that we too should show love and compassion and caring, because God showed that to us first. And finally, I would tell all of you is to remember that we give peace by remembering that everyone has something to offer. that from the shepherds that were in that field that heard that good news of Christ, to the person who's hurt you or that may have offended you, that every single person has something to offer you. That maybe that in that offense that they've done to you, maybe it's just allowing you to get closer to Christ. That maybe it's putting you more on the knees in prayer. That maybe for some of you, that it's allowing you, even in this radio show, to maybe just think more about that those people, maybe what they've gone through, and being more aware of what's kind of going on in their lives.
God uses conflict as a sanctifying process within us. So we can't forget that there is an opportunity in that trial. Exactly.
So we want to thank you all for joining us tonight, and we hope and pray that this message of letting peace begin with me, that it's been an inspiring message for all of you. Our greatest challenge for all of us, including ourselves, is that we receive this peace that Christ comes in this nativity, that we not only just simply celebrate an event, but that we celebrate it and make it an experience of our life, that it changes our lives, and that we leave here sharing and bearing and being creators of peace in this world. Once again, thank you to Matushka Trudy for producing tonight's show. We love having her and all that she does for our show and for our ministry. We do encourage you, once again, if you haven't joined our daily inspirational messages, go right now to our website at thelows.com and click on that subscribe button so that you can receive them by email every single day. And from our family to yours, Merry Christmas to all of you. Have a blessed Christmas and a glorious New Year. God bless you all, and stay strong in your walk of faith.
Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne are the authors of the book Renewing You, a priest, a psychologist, and a plan, which can be purchased at store.ancientfaith.com. Their daily inspirational messages can be found at thelows.com/subscribe. Be sure also to search for The Lows on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Live with The Lows is a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.
Hello, everyone. It's Father Nicholas Louh with Live with the Lows, a show right here on Ancient Faith Radio. And I want to tell you about an amazing in-person retreat